It's been snowing this last week, and so I've been seeing a lot of birds fly into that tree and rest there. Not sure why, don't know anything about birds. But it got me thinking that instead of drawing a huge environment, if I scoped in and just drew a bird on a branch, maybe that would give me an easier time with learning how to do things. And I recently got a Huion Kamvas 16 Gen 3 tablet, and so I've been really excited to use that as well. But for this piece, I wanted to look for a pop of color, and the only bird I know off the top of my head are robins. My bad. So of course, I chose that one to paint because it's the only bird I know, I'm sorry. The bird wasn't really supposed to be the focus here, it's just a focal point, so it has some visual appeal. I wasn't really trying to focus on the animal too much. And so of course I booted up Clip Studio Paint, as one always does, and then I opened a canvas, and then I realized I had no idea what I was doing. Like, I cannot stress this was entirely impromptu based off seeing those birds outside my window. I did not really think this out very well at all. And normally I would highly recommend doing some research about what it is you're trying to create before you jump into it, but I was feeling a little impulsive, I guess, so I did not do that. But it's fine, it turned out fine. If a little bit empty. If a lot a bit empty, but it still looks okay. And I would argue that for a first attempt, I'm okay with it being a little empty. A few things I did learn along the way was that I should have grabbed more references. I really grabbed this bird reference and the branch reference, and I was like, surely I'll be able to imagine the rest of it. And what ended up happening was I looked at more images on my computer and phone elsewhere. But I didn't have enough references to start off with, just this bird, and that made the bird part really good, but the rest of it was not so good. And I feel like this tracks with my personal record because I think I have a lot of failures before I have any successes, and I'm okay with that. I feel like that's a huge part of my process and most people's artistic process, but I know that a lot of my first attempts, a lot of my trials are truly just failures on my end, where I failed to prepare properly or I failed to think things through, and it ends up meaning that a lot of my pieces are generally not very well thought out or very well planned out as I continue to plan them throughout the piece rather than in the initial stages. This also means that it takes me a while to get to the point where I'm actually capable of doing the thing I'm trying to do. But after that, I feel like I'm able to do it pretty consistently, so I'm okay with all of these failures since they build up my experience and learning until I'm capable of doing something without failure, which is naturally a net positive. I think a general experience for younger artists is that failure seems like the worst thing in the world. It's this omnipresent fear that exists and tells us that we're not good enough and we aren't going to ever be artists or we're never going to improve. And after having experienced that on my own and moving past it, it is definitely one of the most oppressive fears in terms of art making. A lot of the times I would feel like I shouldn't even bother doing something because naturally my skill level was not good enough to do it. And I wasn't exactly wrong. My skills were very low and I would not have been able to create something the way I wanted to or the way I had imagined it. However, the fact that that fear stopped me from even trying is very upsetting. I mean, why should I not try to do something just because I'm not necessarily capable of it yet? But that fear frequently won, and so I feel like because I didn't go out of my comfort zone nearly as much, it took me a lot longer to catch up to my peers. Because my desire to have beautiful art was overtaking my desire to create things and adventure in artwork itself. And I was lucky enough that I was consistently in art lessons, which forced me to go outside of my comfort zone, so I ended up learning rapidly anyways, but had I been on my own, had I been self-teaching, I would have been stuck in a lot of ways because there would have been no one to push me past my own boundaries. And so that fear of failure could have prevented me from becoming a better artist or even pursuing art as a whole because I was afraid of it looking bad. When in reality, it is always going to look bad. Your art will look bad until it inevitably starts to look good. That is just the nature of learning how to do anything. You are always going to be bad at it until you get better. And the same goes for me and drawing environments. Because while this bird looks decent and the background isn't horrible, it's still super empty and I was clearly not sure of what to put in any part of this piece. I was not using my colors very well and I was mostly just putting something down and hoping it would work out. And while it looks pleasant on the surface, it's super empty, it's super vague, we don't really have any idea of where this bird is or what's going on in the setting. The only thing that really looks good is the bird itself. With that being said, there are also a lot of things I did actively learn while doing this. The first being that I should use multiple layers for doing this type of piece. When I have a middle ground, foreground, and background, I should be utilizing the layers and my understanding of how they work in order to make my life easier and make everything a little less confusing for myself. I also really enjoyed doing the snow here, and I figured out how to make something look kind of curved when it's one of those soft crystalline surfaces like snowbanks. I also, if it wasn't obvious, have never really drawn birds before. I've done a couple watercolor paintings here and there in classes, but I've never of my own accord drawn a bird, and so I was pretty happy with how I was able to make the feathers come out. I also got to play around more with composition, which is not something I usually focus on since a lot of my drawings tend to be background and subject rather than middle ground, background, and foreground. And so I had to think about how these branches in the background would reflect around the bird and whether this would lead your eye to what I was trying to make the focal point, which is the bird. And I had to think about how colors would interact with each other and make things pop out more, because initially I used a much brighter red for the bird's chest when I really shouldn't have, because it was far too bright for the desaturated tones of this painting. And this was something of a study, so I really only did it in 40 minutes, which got me thinking if I spent a lot more time on something like this, if I had better planning, better references, better ideas, maybe I could make a really good environmental background, even though I've never felt like I'm able to do that. One of my 2025 goals is to figure out how to draw backgrounds and environment paintings so I can actually make full-blown digital paintings. I'm pretty good at doing all of these things with traditional works. However, when it comes to digital art, I've never really figured it out. And this is in large part due to the obtuse way I previously used layers. I wasn't very fond of making multiple layers or folders or dealing with all of that, so I would work with 1 to 2 layers and that was it. But now I've branched out, finally, and I'm using multiple layers and trying to see where I can experiment and change what I've been doing to look better. And so I'm hoping this will continue to help me grow and build on my skills. I think the fear of failure is very real, and everyone seems to have it, but the fact that it stops so many of us from pursuing things is not a good thing. It is important that we recognize our fears and not let them control us, especially in terms of growth and change over time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.